This is completely unacceptable. I demand to see the manager right now.
The laughter spilled from Thomas Hargrove's mouth like a sharp, cutting sound that sliced through the silence of the restaurant. The gleaming chandeliers overhead shimmered with soft, golden light, casting an air of prestige over the room. Each silver fork, each polished wineglass gleamed under the careful attention of the staff, a silent testament to the wealth that had shaped this place. The air smelled of aged wine and the promise of indulgence. Business deals were sealed here, reputations were built, and people were meant to feel small in the shadow of the men who sat at the top. Hargrove, a towering figure in an expensive suit, sat surrounded by his colleagues, their murmurs a low hum beneath the clinking of glasses. His presence commanded the room. A self-made billionaire, his name was known in every corner of the financial world. His power wasn't just in his money, it was in his ability to make others feel like they were nothing. Tasha Williams, the young black waitress, approached the table with a night's specials in hand. She could feel the weight of their eyes on her as she walked through the room, each gaze a reminder of the world she wasn't supposed to belong to. She paused at the table, the menu in her hands shaking ever so slightly. "Can you even read it?" Hargrove's voice broke the quiet, sharp and laced with a smug, careless humor. He gestured to the menu in her hand. "I bet you're just here to look pretty. Can you even make sense of what's on the list? Or should I order for you?" The laughter that followed was a low, mocking rumble. Tasha's cheeks burned with the sting of their ridicule. She had been here countless times before, encountering guests like him who made assumptions based on her appearance alone. They didn't see the intelligence in her eyes, or the ambition that burned behind them. For a moment, she felt the weight of their gaze, the sharpness of their judgment. Her hand tightened around the menu. But then, the tension in her spine shifted, straightening. She stood taller than before. Tasha didn't say a word. She simply lowered the menu, meeting Hargrove's gaze with a steady calm that sent an uncomfortable ripple through the table. The laughter stilled. Tasha didn't need to say anything in that moment, yet she did. Her voice, smooth and deliberate, cut through the air like an unexpected chord. In Latin, she said, her words clear, each syllable perfect. "Your words are an insult to the language of the ancients, sir." The room went silent. The sound of cutlery and murmured conversations faded as Hargrove's laughter died in his throat. For a brief second, he was left speechless. The stunned silence that followed was deafening. Her words hung in the air, lingering, impossible to ignore. Tasha's eyes never left Hargrove's face, her expression unwavering. It was the language of scholars, of intellectuals, the language that had been the foundation of knowledge for centuries, and she had spoken it. In front of the man who had thought he could break her with a joke, Hargrove's smugness faltered, his smirk faltering as he stared at Tasha with disbelief. The arrogance in his posture began to slip away, the cracks in his confidence growing wider. He had underestimated her, misjudged her completely. Tasha didn't wait for his reply. She simply turned on her heel and walked away, the sound of her shoes tapping against the floor echoing behind her. The moment, sharp and uncomfortable, lingered in the room like an unfinished note. Tasha didn't look back, but she could feel the weight of the moment, as if the eyes of everyone in the room were still upon her. There was something in that brief exchange, something in how she had stood her ground. It wasn't just about proving Hargrove wrong. It was about something bigger, about not allowing herself to be seen as lesser. No matter how many people tried to push her into that box. As she disappeared into the back of the restaurant, her pulse was steady. But there was something else too, a quiet strength that surged inside her. Hargrove's laughter might have been the first attack, but it wouldn't be the last. He had only just started to see the consequences of underestimating her. Tasha had learned long ago how to hide the sting of insults, but today, the words were different. They cut deeper. The laughter from Hargrove and his associates still echoed in her ears as she retreated to the back of the restaurant. She stepped into the kitchen, the clatter of plates and the heat of the ovens barely registering as her mind replayed the scene. The sharpness of his voice, the cruelty in his smile. It wasn't the first time someone had made her feel small. It wouldn't be the last. She shut the door behind her, feeling the weight of it all pressing down. But this time, something had shifted. A piece of her resolve had snapped, and a quiet anger simmered beneath her calm exterior. Tasha was used to this. The subtle ways people made her feel less than. The sideways glances, the whispered comments when she passed by. It was in the way people would ask her if she really understood what was on the menu. As if being a waitress at a five-star restaurant was the pinnacle of her intelligence. As if her job defined her worth. But today, it had been different. Hargrove's mocking laugh was louder than any of the small slights she had endured over the years. His words weren't just about the menu. They were a reminder of the world that always saw her as lesser. In the kitchen, she found herself alone for a moment, the hustle of her co-workers carrying on around her. She leaned against the cold, steel counter, eyes closed, breathing deeply to steady herself. She could feel the heat of the ovens behind her, the sharp scent of spices and grease filling the air. Her thoughts flashed back to her childhood in Chicago, a place where she learned early on that being different often meant being dismissed. Her mother, a single parent, had worked long hours as a nurse, never making enough to live comfortably but always pushing Tasha to excel. Tasha's brilliance had always been a quiet thing, often overlooked. Her grades, her love for books, her hunger for knowledge, it was all invisible to most. In the neighborhood, she was just another kid trying to stay out of trouble, trying to survive. But inside, she had always known there was more to her than the life people expected her to lead. There was a time when she had asked herself why she couldn't just be like everyone else, why she had to work harder, fight harder for even a moment of recognition. But now, as she stood in the kitchen of a restaurant filled with luxury and privilege, she realized something. All those years of trying to fit in, of shrinking to make others comfortable, had gotten her nowhere. The moment Hargrove had laughed at her, he had shown her exactly who he was. But more than that, he had shown her something about herself, something she had almost forgotten. Tasha was more than the menu, more than her uniform, more than the assumptions people made about her. Her hands tightened into fists, a small symbol of her inner strength. She could hear her mother's voice in her head, telling her to hold her head high, to be proud, no matter what. It wasn't the first time Tasha had to remind herself of that lesson, but today, it felt like the moment she had been waiting for. The laughter had made her feel small, but it also had given her clarity. No more shrinking, no more allowing the world to define who she was. She would not let this moment pass without standing up for herself. The moment she walked back into that dining room, she would carry herself differently. The next time Hargrove looked at her, he wouldn't see the waitress he mocked. He would see a woman who had endured far too much to let one man's mockery define her. Thomas Hargrove stared at his reflection in the window, the city lights glittering like diamonds beneath him. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, something that shouldn't have. He had built his empire from the ground up, each step a calculated move, each decision designed to pull him further from the world he had come from. As a self-made billionaire, he was used to being in control. His wealth, his success, had given him power, a power he wielded without hesitation. To Hargrove, the world was simple. The wealthy were at the top, the deserving few, and the rest, well, they were nothing more than background noise, serving their purpose in a system that made sense to him. But that moment at the restaurant, the moment with Tasha, had shaken something deep inside him. Her words, so calm, so calculated, had struck him with the force of something he wasn't prepared for. Your words are an insult to the language of the ancients, sir. He was no stranger to mockery. He had made a name for himself by silencing those who doubted him. But this was different. The way she said it, the way she held his gaze, the quiet defiance in her voice wasn't something he could easily dismiss. It was as if she had seen through the carefully constructed walls he had built around himself. Walls made of wealth, status, and arrogance. And worse, it was a challenge he didn't know how to respond to. Hargrove turned away from the window and paced the length of his office. The floor beneath him was made of smooth marble, cool to the touch, but it didn't bring him the comfort it once had. He stopped by his desk, his fingers brushing over the papers, the contracts, the million-dollar deals that had once given him a sense of power. But today, they felt empty. As a child, Hargrove had been told that he would never amount to anything. His parents had neglected him, focusing more on their own lives than on him. He was the quiet boy in the corner, always watching, always listening, but never heard. The world had made it clear early on that people like him, kids from broken homes, kids from nothing, didn't belong in the rooms where decisions were made. But Hargrove didn't accept that. He refused to be just another face in the crowd. He fought back, clawing his way to the top, one calculated step at a time. His success was proof that the world was wrong, that he had proven them all wrong. But as he sat back in his chair, trying to push the memory of Tasha's words from his mind, he realized something. There was still a part of him that was that neglected child, still desperate for approval, still terrified of being dismissed. He had built his empire on the belief that he could never be like those people. People like Tasha, people who were beneath him. But in that moment, her simple, elegant challenge had reminded him of something he thought he had buried, his own fear. The contrast was striking. Here he was, a man worth billions, sitting in a room of luxury and power, yet still clinging to the idea that his worth could be measured by his status, his money, his ability to dominate others. And Tasha, her quiet dignity, her refusal to be belittled, had called all of that into question. His mind raced. He couldn't let her challenge go unanswered. He was a man of influence. People respected him, feared him. She had no idea what she was dealing with. But there was something about her calm strength that unsettled him. The walls of his office felt smaller now. The city outside no longer felt like a victory. It felt like a cage. He had always thought he was above it all. But now, for the first time, he realized that his world was more fragile than he'd ever allowed himself to believe. As Hargrove sat in his chair, his fingers tapping restlessly against the desk, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just crossed a line. The challenge had been issued, but he had no idea how deep it would go. Tasha had unknowingly opened a door that he might not be able to close. The question now was, would he be able to reclaim his dominance, or had he already lost control? Tasha's hands shook slightly as she refilled glasses, the cool surface of the wine bottle slick under her fingers. She moved swiftly between tables, her steps sharp, each one a calculated movement. But despite the rhythm of her work, she couldn't shake the image of Hargrove's smug face, the sound of his laughter still echoing in her ears. She had been dismissed before, of course, people like her were used to it. But this was different. His mockery had pierced deeper than most insults, because it wasn't just about her. It was about everything she had fought for, everything she had ever struggled to prove. His words were a reminder that no matter how much she worked, no matter how far she rose, people like him would always see her as beneath them. The hum of conversations surrounded her as she moved between guests, the polished silver and crystal glinting under the soft glow of chandelier. But her mind wasn't on the wine she poured or the food she served. It was on the tables she passed, where the laughter of Hargrove and his colleagues still reverberated as she passed a table near the back. A few words drifted into her ears. Ruthless businessman. Doesn't care about anyone. Treats people like trash. The words cut through the air, fragments of conversations she couldn't ignore. They weren't just talking about Hargrove's business dealings, they were talking about him as a person. They didn't see the billionaire CEO, they saw the man who used his wealth to break others, the man who dismissed people like Tasha as expendable. She stopped walking for a moment, the words settling like a weight on her chest. They were right. He had never seen her as anything but a servant, as a lesser being. But that moment when he laughed at her, mocking her, judging her, something in her had snapped. She wasn't just a waitress. She was someone who had fought her entire life to be seen. And now, she was going to make him see her. In the back of the restaurant, Tasha set down the wine bottle and took a deep breath. Her heart beat faster, not from the rush of serving, but from the tension building inside her. She wasn't sure how she was going to do it yet, but she was going to confront Hargrove just then. The restaurant owner, Carl Mason, a man in his mid-50s with a graying beard and a friendly smile, approached her. He was a long-time acquaintance of Hargrove's and had been on the receiving end of many of his business deals. "You're a hard worker, Tasha," Carl said, his tone neutral, but with a hint of caution. "But you've got to understand, people like Hargrove, well, they don't take well to challenges. You're better off letting this one slide." Tasha stiffened at his words. It wasn't the first time she'd been told to back off, but it was the first time it had come from someone who had seen the way Hargrove operated up close. Carl was a good man, but he didn't understand. He hadn't spent a lifetime fighting for recognition, for respect, for the right to be seen as equal. "He's a billionaire," Tasha, Carl continued, his voice low. "You think one little confrontation is going to change anything? He'll just squash you like he does everyone else." Tasha's breath quickened. Her mind flashed to the words she had heard from the other guests, to the way Hargrove had made her feel so small. She realized, with a clarity she hadn't known before, that this wasn't just about him. This wasn't about one man or one incident. This was about something bigger, about how people like her were treated every single day, how they were pushed down and silenced. "I'm not going to let it slide," she said firmly, her voice calm but unwavering. "I'm not afraid of him." Carl's eyes softened, but he didn't press the matter further. He knew what kind of person Tasha was: determined, capable, but also someone who had learned how to survive in a world that often didn't care. Still, he couldn't help but warn her. "I don't want to see you get hurt," he said, the concern in his voice genuine. But Tasha was already past him, walking toward the door that separated the back of the restaurant from the main dining room. The weight of Carl's words lingered in the air, but they couldn't stop her now. She had made up her mind. Tasha stood for a moment outside the door, gathering her strength. Her heart was pounding in her chest, but there was no turning back. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for everyone who had been overlooked, dismissed, and belittled. She had a chance to make a statement, to show that she wasn't afraid. She stepped through the door, her heels clicking sharply on the floor, and walked toward Hargrove's table. The eyes of the entire room seemed to fall on her as she approached Hargrove. The moment hung in the air, a fragile balance between fear and resolve. Tasha was caught between the desire for justice and the fear of what might come next. But her steps were steady, her resolve hardening with every inch she moved toward him. This wasn't just about Hargrove anymore. It was about changing the way the world saw people like her. Tasha stood by the window in her apartment, staring out at the city that seemed to stretch on forever. The lights flickered below, a distant reminder of the wealth and power that filled the skyscrapers, the very kind of power she had learned to resent. But her mind wasn't on the glimmering cityscape tonight. It was on a different world. The world she had once immersed herself in. Her fingers brushed against the edge of an old, leather-bound notebook resting on the kitchen table. It was worn, the pages creased from years of use, but to her, it was a treasure. Tasha opened it, her eyes scanning the familiar Latin phrases written neatly on the pages. She had come a long way from the girl who had been told to stay in her place, who was overlooked in classrooms and society. Latin was more than just a language to her. It was a weapon, a symbol of defiance, and a doorway to a world that had long been closed to people like her. It hadn't always been like this. In high school, Tasha had been just another face in the crowd. Brilliant, yes, but invisible. Her teachers had praised her work, but there were limits to how far a girl like her could go. She was from the south side of Chicago, working class black, and often dismissed by the world around her. People like her were supposed to stay in their lane. Dreaming big was a luxury for the wealthy, for those with the right connections. But Tasha had never been one to accept the boundaries others placed on her. She knew that education was the only way out of the life that had been assigned to her. She had always loved history, fascinated by the great civilizations of the past. The Greeks, the Romans, their legacies had shaped the world, and she wanted to understand them in their purest form. She had found a scholarship for a summer program in classical studies at a prestigious university. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She had worked 2 jobs, waitressing, cleaning, anything she could do to pay for tuition and books. The hours were long, and the exhaustion weighed on her. But every night, when she cracked open her Latin textbook, it felt like she was holding a key to a world that had been kept from her. It was in those early hours, sitting in her small apartment with a stack of textbooks, that Tasha had fallen in love with the language. Latin wasn't just about conjugating verbs or memorizing vocabulary. It was the language of power. Cicero, Virgil, their words had shaped empires, influenced rulers, and resonated across time. To speak it, to understand it, was to connect to something greater than herself. Tasha often thought about the first time she recited a passage from Cicero in a seminar, the words flowing with ease, the meaning striking her with a force she couldn't explain. She had been terrified at first, knowing the other students came from wealthier backgrounds, more polished educations. But when she spoke, when the Latin filled the room, she felt the weight of history behind her. She wasn't just a waitress, a girl from the wrong side of town. She was part of something bigger, something timeless. Back in her apartment, Tasha's eyes landed on a passage from Cicero that she had highlighted long ago. She read it aloud softly to herself. Inter arma enim silent leges. In times of war, the law falls silent. The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy with meaning. Cicero had spoken these words in a time of political corruption, a time when the law was manipulated by those in power for their own gain. The parallels were unmistakable. The system that kept her and others like her in the shadows wasn't much different. Hargrove, with his wealth and influence, was just another figure in a long line of those who had used power to silence voices like hers. Tasha closed the notebook, her fingers lingering on the cover. The weight of Cicero's words resonated deeper now. She was no longer just learning history. She was living it. She was part of the struggle for justice, just as he had been. It wasn't just about one man in a restaurant. It wasn't just about Hargrove's laughter or his mocking tone. It was about a system that had existed for centuries, a system that still sought to crush those who dared to challenge it. Tasha stood by the window again, her reflection merging with the city lights outside. The words from Cicero echoed in her mind, a reminder that justice could be a long and difficult fight. But she was ready now, ready to take on more than just Hargrove, ready to challenge the system that had kept her, and so many others, invisible for far too long. This was no longer just about one moment. It was the beginning of a revolution, one word at a time. The phone rang 3 times before the silence in Hargrove's office was broken by the sharp click of his assistant's voice. Mr. Hargrove, the situation is escalating. Hargrove sat behind his polished mahogany desk, his hands clenched around a crystal glass of water. The city sprawled outside his office windows, the skyline a symbol of everything he had built, everything he had sacrificed for. The power, the respect, the adoration. It had all been carefully curated over the years, a fortress made of wealth and influence, towering high above the masses. Until now, his assistant's voice broke through his thoughts again. The video's gone viral. It's all over the news. People are calling it a humiliation. Your humiliation. Hargrove's fingers tightened around the glass, his knuckles white. He didn't need to ask which video she meant. The incident at the restaurant had ignited something he had never expected. Tasha's calm, defiant words in Latin had struck a chord, sparking a wave of support for her and a backlash against him. The video had spread like wildfire, each share, each post, each tweet pushing him closer to the edge of something he hadn't anticipated. Vulnerability. He watched the screen of his phone as the notifications kept flooding in. Tweets, articles, news reports, all with the same narrative. Billionaire CEO dismisses waitress, gets humiliated in front of his entire table. The words hit him harder than any financial setback ever had. He was no longer the man in control, the untouchable figure who had always played the game by his rules. He was exposed on the meeting room. Hargrove's PR team scrambled, their faces a mix of panic and determination. We need to respond quickly, sir, one of his senior advisors said, flipping through a stack of media reports. We have to discredit her, spin this in a way that makes her seem unreasonable, a radical, perhaps, someone with an agenda. But Hargrove didn't answer. His mind was elsewhere. His ego, once inflated by the adoration of wealth and power, now sat in stark contrast to the moral righteousness of Tasha's stance. She had spoken, and her words, calm, measured, had struck him in a way he couldn't shake. She wasn't the woman he had assumed she was. She wasn't just a waitress. She was a challenge. And it unsettled him more than he cared to admit. I think we need to focus on damage control, his PR manager said, her voice low. We'll release an apology. Maybe something personal. Address the misunderstanding. Hargrove still didn't speak. His thoughts were elsewhere, back to the moment when she had looked him in the eyes, her steady voice cutting through his laughter like a blade. "Your words are an insult to the language of the ancients, sir." It wasn't just about Latin. It wasn't even about her. It was about the fact that in that moment, for the first time in a long time, he felt small. He, who had always controlled the narrative, had found himself on the receiving end of something bigger than money, bigger than status. Later that evening, in the solitude of his penthouse, Hargrove stared out at the city once more. But this time it felt distant, alien, almost. The familiar skyline that once represented his triumphs now felt like a cage, a reminder of how precariously his empire hung. His reflection in the window seemed to mock him. He had built it all, and yet here he was, in the midst of something he couldn't control. His phone buzzed. He looked down at the screen and saw an envelope icon. A letter. Not from a journalist, not from his team. It was from someone else, someone with a different kind of power. Hargrove opened it. The words were short, direct. "I know what you did to get here, Thomas. It's time to make things right, or else the truth will come to light." The message was unsigned, but the weight of it was unmistakable. His heart rate quickened. His mind raced. He had built his career on making people disappear, on covering up the past that he had buried. Now it seemed as if that past was clawing its way back to the surface. The room felt colder now, the city lights outside no longer comforting but suffocating. Hargrove stared at the letter, his mind spinning. The walls, once so strong, were crumbling. There was something darker lurking in his past, something that could unravel everything he had built, but he wasn't ready to face it. He wasn't ready to admit the truth, not yet. So, he did what he always did. He pushed it aside, locked it away. But even as he did, he could feel the weight of it growing, pulling him toward something he couldn't outrun. The sound of keys clicking echoed through the dimly lit office, the only light coming from the flickering screen of Laura Graves's laptop. She leaned forward, her fingers moving with precision as she pieced together a story that could topple a giant dot. Laura wasn't new to investigative journalism. She had spent years digging through layers of public relations masks, uncovering the truth hidden behind polished facades. But Hargrove's empire was different. The deeper she dug, the more unsettling the truth became. The video of Tasha and Hargrove had become the spark that ignited a firestorm. Public outrage simmered just beneath the surface, and Laura could feel it. The more she read, the clearer it became. Hargrove was no longer just a businessman to be admired. He was a symbol of everything wrong with the system, everything that Tasha had stood up against. Laura began with the basics. Hargrove's rise to power. Born into a family with little wealth, he had clawed his way up, one deal at a time. She uncovered articles from decades ago, each one praising his relentless pursuit of success, the self-made billionaire who defied the odds. But as Laura dug deeper, she found inconsistencies, whispers of aggressive takeovers, shady deals, and cutthroat tactics that left many struggling in his wake. The more Laura spoke to Hargrove's former colleagues, the clearer the pattern emerged. One by one, they told her stories of how Hargrove had exploited employees, discarded them when they no longer served his purpose. A former assistant, now living in a small apartment on the outskirts of the city, described how she had been pushed to the breaking point, working 80-hour weeks with little compensation, only to be fired when she dared to ask for a raise. Another source, a former business partner, recounted how Hargrove had undermined him in a deal, taking the credit for a venture that had been a team effort. The partner's voice still trembled with bitterness when he spoke about the betrayal. "He's got no loyalty," the man had said. "It's all about the climb. Once you're up, everyone else is just a stepping stone." The more Laura listened, the more the portrait of Hargrove became clear. A man who had built his empire on the backs of others, using people as tools and discarding them when they were no longer useful. His wealth and power had been earned at the expense of everyone who had fallen along the way. Laura's office was filled with the noise of her thoughts. As the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, she couldn't help but wonder, how had Hargrove gotten away with it for so long? Was it the money, the power, or was it simply that no one had ever dared challenge him until now? She flipped through her notes, the names of former employees scribbled across the pages. She needed more. She needed someone who could give her the smoking gun, the final piece that would expose everything. And then, like a flash of lightning, she found it. A former legal advisor, a woman who had worked closely with Hargrove during some of his earliest corporate battles. When Laura contacted her, the woman was hesitant, reluctant to speak. But eventually, after hours of coaxing, she relented. "He's a monster," the woman said in a trembling voice. "I was there when he crushed a rival company, drove them into bankruptcy just to buy up their assets on the cheap. I watched him do it, and the whole time, he didn't care. He never cared about the people, only the money." The woman's words were damning, but they weren't enough. Laura needed more. She needed documents, evidence that would tie Hargrove's ruthless business practices to something that could bring him down. The pressure was mounting. The news of Hargrove's mistreatment of employees, his disregard for ethics, had already begun to ripple through the media. But it wasn't enough yet. People were angry, yes, but Hargrove was still untouchable. He had money, influence. He could weather a storm. What he couldn't weather was the truth. Laura's heart raced as she opened an encrypted file sent to her by an anonymous source. Inside were financial records, clear evidence of illegal activity, bribes and cover-ups. This was the smoking gun she had been searching for. As she read through the documents, her mind raced. She could feel the weight of the story she was about to break. The kind of story that would change everything. The kind of story that could take down an empire. She set the laptop down, her hand shaking. The pieces were all in place now. The confrontation was inevitable. The world was about to see Hargrove for who he truly was, and it was a reckoning he couldn't avoid. The room was elegant, bathed in soft, golden light from chandeliers that hung like delicate sculptures above the gathering. The clinking of glasses, the soft murmur of the guests, the rustling of expensive suits, all of it felt distant to Tasha. She wasn't there to be part of this world. She was there to make sure this world saw her, heard her. Hargrove stood at the front of the room, confident as always, his presence commanding. The billionaire CEO was the centerpiece of the charity event, the golden boy of the city, hailed for his generosity. His reputation, built on a carefully crafted image of benevolence and success, was now at risk, and Tasha was about to take it apart. Piece by piece, her heart beat steadily in her chest as she watched him, her thoughts clear. The man who had laughed at her, dismissed her, he was a fraud. And tonight, in front of this crowd, she was going to expose him. Tasha moved through the crowd with purpose, the chatter fading as her presence became undeniable. She had waited for this moment, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been crushed under the weight of people like Hargrove. She knew this event was a perfect stage. His empire, built on a foundation of pride and exploitation, needed to be confronted. As Hargrove began his speech, his smooth, practiced voice filling the room with empty promises of change, Tasha stepped forward. The room grew silent, and all eyes turned to her. She was no longer the waitress in a restaurant. She was no longer the woman in the background. She was the one who had come to stand for something greater. Without hesitation, she took the microphone from the stand, her fingers steady. Hargrove's eyes locked onto hers, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. The audience stirred, unsure of what was happening. Tasha spoke clearly, her voice unwavering. "Mr. Hargrove, you stand here, claiming to care about justice, about making the world a better place. But the truth is that you have built your wealth on the backs of people like me, people who are invisible to you, people whose struggles you choose to ignore." The room fell still, the air thick with tension. Hargrove shifted on his feet, his jaw tightening, but Tasha didn't back down. She pressed forward. "You've used your power to trample over the people who made your success possible," she continued, her words sharp, each one deliberate. "You hide behind your wealth and your reputation, but the truth is, your success was never just about hard work. It was about using others, discarding them when they no longer served your needs." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. She could feel the eyes of the room on her, some filled with skepticism, others with curiosity. Hargrove stood there, his pride flickering in his eyes, but something else, a flicker of uncertainty, was creeping in. "You mocked me because you thought I was nothing," Tasha went on, her voice rising with conviction. "But I am not the problem. The system that rewards men like you, who take and give nothing in return, that's the problem. And it's time someone called it out for what it is." Tasha's words were a challenge, a gauntlet thrown at Hargrove's feet. The audience was divided, some applauding quietly, others shifting uncomfortably in their seats. But the damage was done. Hargrove's smooth facade had cracked. His carefully curated image was no longer enough to shield him from the truth. Hargrove's posture stiffened, his usual confidence faltering. He cleared his throat, attempting to regain control of the room. I apologize for any offense my actions may have caused," he said, his voice steady but lacking the authority it once held. "But what I do for the greater good. I believe in progress and the vision of a better future for everyone." His words rang hollow, the apology nothing more than a feeble attempt to salvage his reputation. The room, once captivated by his presence, was now filled with whispers and doubt. Tasha stood still, unwavering. She had done what she came to do. She had pushed Hargrove into a corner, forcing him to face the consequences of his actions. The crowd was watching, and they were no longer looking at Hargrove the way they once had. His power, his dominance, suddenly it didn't seem so certain anymore as Hargrove retreated from the stage. The murmurs of the crowd grew louder. The apology had not been enough. Tasha had exposed him for who he truly was, and the world was beginning to see through the veil he had so carefully maintained. Tasha's victory wasn't just personal. It wasn't just about one man. It was about a system that had kept people like her at the margins for too long. As she stood there, the weight of her words still hanging in the air, she realized that this moment was the beginning of something bigger, something that could shift the way people saw power, saw justice, and saw themselves. And for the first time, Tasha felt the stirrings of something powerful, something that had always been there but had never been given the chance to shine. Hope. Tasha stood at the edge of the city watching as the morning sun broke through the horizon. The streets were just beginning to wake up, cars hummed by pedestrians rushed toward their destinations, but everything felt different now. The world was still the same, but she wasn't. She had changed. It had been a week since the charity event, since she had stood face to face with Hargrove and called out the system that had kept people like her hidden in the shadows. Her heart still carried the weight of that moment, but it was lighter now, as if she had shed the layers of fear that had once clung to her. The victory wasn't just about the public confrontation. It was about something deeper, something she had fought for all her life. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, her fingers swiping across the screen to reveal an email. The subject line was simple: job offer, Justice Advocacy Director. Tasha's breath caught in her throat as she opened the message. The organization was one she had admired for years, an advocacy group focused on social justice and equality, working to dismantle the very systems that had silenced so many people like her. They wanted her. They wanted her intellect. They wanted her passion for justice. They wanted the very things Hargrove had tried to dismiss, and they were offering her a chance to lead. Her fingers trembled as she read through the details. A salary that was more than enough to live comfortably, an opportunity to make a real impact, to finally be in a position where her voice mattered, where she would no longer be overlooked. This wasn't just a job. This was the chance to rewrite her future. Across the city, Hargrove's empire was crumbling. His company had been in damage control mode ever since the public confrontation. The viral video, the exposure of his unethical practices, the whispers about his past, they had all taken their toll. Hargrove's image, once unshakable, now stood on shaky ground. His PR team worked overtime, but the public sentiment had already shifted. He was no longer the respected businessman. He was the man who had been exposed for what he truly was, someone who used power to trample on others, to elevate himself at the expense of those beneath him. It was a slow unraveling. His corporate deals faltered. Former partners distanced themselves, and all the money in the world couldn't buy back the reputation he had lost. Hargrove's empire, built on the exploitation of others, was beginning to fall apart. But Tasha wasn't looking back. The past, everything she had fought against, was no longer her anchor. She wasn't defined by the system that had tried to hold her down. She was defined by the choices she made from this point forward. She walked out of her apartment building, the cool morning air brushing against her skin. She had made her decision. She would not be part of a broken system that had no place for people like her. Instead, she would be the change it so desperately needed. As she made her way down the street, Tasha couldn't help but reflect on everything that had led to this moment. The harsh words, the laughs, the moments of doubt. But none of it had broken her. It had made her stronger. And now, she stood on the other side of the battle, knowing that this was just the beginning. There would be more fights, more challenges. But she was ready. She had reclaimed her dignity not just in that restaurant with Hargrove, but every single day since. Her words in Latin had not just been a response. There had been a declaration that she would not be silenced. A declaration that true power wasn't in wealth or status. True power was in the ability to stand firm for what was right, to speak the truth no matter the cost. Tasha stepped into the subway, the hum of the train growing louder as it approached. She took one last look at the world outside, at the city that had once seemed too big, too distant, and realized she had found her place in it. Her battle wasn't over, but she had already won the most important victory, the reclamation of herself.